Okay. Continuing with our discussion about the nutriments, I'll offer a bit more reflection about the nutriment of physical food. In the sutta called A Child's Flesh, it's part of the Samyutta Nikaya. It's 12.63 in the Samyutta Nikaya. The Buddha offers really shocking metaphors and similes for the four nutriments, which are designed to break our attachment to these processes, which are designed to give a strong kind of a shock treatment to make us finally turn away from having any hope that these nutriments will be the source of happiness, or what we should rely on. The simile for material food is a couple which is taking a trip across the desert. They run out of food in the middle of the desert and would not be able to survive or make it to complete their journey. They eat their little child in order to be able to reach their destination. And while they're eating their child's flesh, they beat their breasts and cry, "Where are you, our only child? Where are you, our only child?" I want to assure you that the Buddha never recommended cannibalism. He never recommended killing. This metaphor is given for its shock value. Food is never free from dukkha. It's got the combination of the sukha and the dukkha. It's got the pleasure factor because we need it, or we want to escape from the pain of hunger. And so it's within our nature as a sentient mammal to feel a pleasure when we're about to relieve that physical hunger by taking some food. The beings, throughout existence have been so involved in the labor and tears and pain and struggle around having enough food or getting enough food to eat. I don't know whether this is true, but I heard that perhaps in the earliest days of humanity, when humans were hunters and gatherers, there were so few of them, they were able to just find some food and only spend a few hours each day, picking up some honey or some fruit or some roots or something nutritious from the forest. But then after the invention of agriculture, it became far more laborious to create food. And it was possible for the human race to become much more populous. So there got to be more and more people. they could get enough calories to feed themselves to have a whole, village with 30, 40, 50 people all living together. And but the struggle to create food became much more laborious and difficult. And then living our success in getting food enabled us to live on top of each other, close together, and close to our animals, so that then we were able to share all kinds of contagious diseases and suffer in that way. A long time ago, before I was ordained, I had a long hike in the state of Florida, and had a chance to visit the Lake Miyaka in Florida. That's on the west side of Florida. So this park during the rainy season, there were very vast marshes, and then during the dry season, the marshes all dried up and became fields, and the watery part of the land became concentrated on the river, and there was this one Lake Miyaka. So while we were staying there, it was during this dry season, and there was a tremendous concentration of fish and birds and animals, which during the other part of the year were living in a much larger amount of acreage. But at this time of the year, they were all like focused and concentrated and jammed in together around this lake. And we saw a bird catching a small fish, even as that bird was being stalked and then picked up and taken by a large predator bird. And it gave this, vision of this, what you could call a healthy ecosystem, which is comprised of so many hundreds and hundreds, or maybe thousands of different species, all eating each other. Even it's said that in this world that we, if we're not eating meat, we're eating the product of organic life. So the whole world is in the process of this cycle of consuming and eating. There's a way in which you could say that the necessity of obtaining and consuming food is super tedious, very laborious, very repetitive. First, we have to, catch it or grow it, and then harvest it and prepare it and cause it to be edible, and then cook it and cut it up and serve it, and then we have to chew it and digest it and excrete it, and then we have to wash up and wash the dishes, and then a few hours later we have to do the same thing again and again and again. It's kind of reminding of the tedious quality of the round of rebirth, to think of so many beings, and the first thing they have to do is they have to eat. Even if we consider joy of eating or the aesthetic beauty of a delicious meal, or even the way that eating food comes to be surrounded with a lot of other things like social interaction, like it's a very important way that families or peoples come together around sharing the meal. So that becomes, a kind of an important social ritual. Or it could be that there are religious rituals involved with eating, like taking the communion in Catholicism or other things. Or it could be that there is this aesthetic aspect of the way the food is served in a wonderful high class restaurant with a lot of surrounding things to make it aesthetic, but all of that doesn't remove this basic effort of labor, and something which is got kind of that there's an aspect of that's gross, that's repulsive about food, like chewing it, chewing the food. And if you happen to chew the food and you wanted to, spit it out to give it to your child or to your friend or something like that, that would seem really strange, wouldn't it? And with this social, our spiritual, our aesthetic side of food, then so many other emotional drives, our emotional afflictions can become to be tied up with eating. That a person can eat when they're depressed, or they can eat when they're anxious, or they can eat, to cover up their fear or to cover up other things. And then there's another way of considering the using of food, which is problematical, and that is the way that when we consume and digest the food, then the food is broken down and absorbed and becomes part of us, part of our body. And then our body comes to be made up of the food that we've eaten. So we consume the food and the food consumes us. We become what we eat. So then my idea about using food in the wise way is we can't escape from the grosser, repulsive aspect of the whole process, the tedious aspect of the whole process of getting food and consuming food. Even if we dress it up and try to think that we're only going to use food which is very pure, and that's somehow going to make it to be not gross, but that never works. No matter what kind of a special diet you followed to try to purify the food in that way, it wouldn't work. It wouldn't take away the dukkha aspect of it. But the purification of food can occur by way of mindfulness and coming to have a change in our relationship to this process. There's an expression I heard from my teacher, Bhante Gunaratana. He said this about dukkha. He said that an awakened person knows dukkha, but they're not participating in dukkha. So a fully enlightened person is not cut off from the awareness of dukkha. They can still see fully and perfectly clearly with the eye of wisdom what dukkha is and how it arises. But they're not participating in dukkha because they have given up the craving and the grasping in relationship to those things that otherwise they would have been attached to. So we can still experience physical hunger and thirst. We know that because of causes and conditions, having taken a human birth, every day or any time that we go for too long without food or without drink, we'll experience physical hunger and thirst. When we are hungry and we approach someplace where some food is available, we would still have the physical body reactions of like salivating and the starting of the digestive juices starting up in the stomach. And we would still have the pleasant feeling, which is a kind of the bodily pleasant feeling, knowing that the instability and discomfort of being hungry is very soon going to be finished. But we would know this pleasant feeling as being something that's extremely transient, unstable, and unreliable. And so we wouldn't be relying on it, but still we would recognize it. And then even the whole mental standpoint or the framework of how the mind is affected when we're approaching food and dealing with food, all of the different kinds of thoughts and feelings that can come up in connection with food can be observed and noticed with mindfulness. We would be able to see them from a somewhat detached perspective. So instead of noticing this process of the pleasant feeling connected with having some food when one is hungry, instead of having greed arising at that point, you would just notice, oh, this is what the five khandhas are doing. This is what the mind and body are doing on this occasion because of being a human being and because this life is not yet finished. So those things can be experienced, even that what we normally read and interpret as the desire or the craving for food, we can reframe them as being just a feeling, just a pleasant feeling, or just an unpleasant feeling that's part of the process of taking food. And when there's this non-identification, we can be aware of the danger in food, the danger of greed, or the danger of relying on something which is impermanent, or the danger of seeing the hardship that was involved in the creation of the food and bringing the food to the table, seeing all the labor that was involved, all of the sacrifice that was involved, even the loss of life that's involved in bringing a piece of lettuce to the plate. Not to mention eating something that is coming from an animal directly. And with that, there's the ground for compassion to arise. So then eating the food is an opportunity for that compassion, also an opportunity for gratitude, for acknowledging that which has been given, an opportunity for being disillusioned with the food, in the sense that knowing that eating the food is not solving very much. The pleasure or the happiness that comes from food is a very weak, unstable, and a meager kind of happiness compared to the true happiness which we seek. And with that, we become disillusioned. We develop that nibbida. And with that, it supports the fading away of passion and desire. And with that, it's even possible that a person can, even while being in the midst of this process of the whole process with food and eating, which is so fraught with so many dangers and so many difficulties, one could experience personal freedom in relation to all that. And the freedom is because of detachment. A very beautiful way that it manifests for the person who's an alms mendicant when they go on an alms round, or when they go to receive the food that's been given. The food could be enough, or it could be not enough. It could be perfectly balanced and nutritious, or it could be not balanced and nutritious. It's even possible to go out on an alms round if you go on what they call a faith pindapat, where you don't know for sure if anything will be offered at all, because it has not been arranged in advance. You just go out, whether it's in the neighborhood or in the town, with the alms bowl, and one might get nothing at all. And when you know that this contentment has been really developed, then even getting nothing at all, the mind is not disturbed. And experience, it's like then you have a chance to go and sit for meditation, and without the troublesome aspects of eating the food, and experiencing that freedom that comes from being perfectly content with whatever comes along, whatever the universe provides, is a very beautiful space that's supporting equanimity and supporting the possibility of awakening. Food is also a stand-in for the other physical things that we need for survival. So in this particular sutta, they don't mention lodgings, clothing, medicine as being in part of the 4 basic nutriments. But I believe that the nutriment of food then by extension can include those other things. And again, we can see how much terrible danger there is with lodging, like how much anxiety there could be if the lodging is not what it should be, or if the lodging is insecure and when one feels that one might not have lodging, how so much fear and anxiety could be stirred up by that, and how much craving could be stirred up by that, and what a danger it is. And then if there is sufficient lodging, and if one has the expectation that the lodging will not only be here tonight, but it will also be available tomorrow, then how much danger there is to, even though, like for us who are supposed to be wandering monastics, just carrying our robes and our alms bowl with a complete sense of freedom, that nevertheless there's a danger to think like a householder, and to think that, to have so much attachment to this lodging. If you think of the medicine, if someone is ill and they need something because of illness, we have an allowance in our monastic rules that when there's it's a pretty broad allowance. When there's an invitation or from somebody in our family, we're able to ask for what we need. So with the food, we're supposed to simply accept whatever they offer us. But with the medicine, like if I need an aspirin, or if I need some particular kind of tea to settle my stomach, or I need a particular medicine that was prescribed by the doctor, we have the permission to just go to somebody who's made an offer and says, I need this medicine, may I have this medicine? But you can see how actually for the vast majority in the world, they're not so spoiled as to think that they would automatically get the medicine that they need just because they need it. And so many people throughout the world would come to suffer racking pain, loss of function, and early death, all because they didn't have the opportunity of getting the medicine that they need. So then the challenge for us then is, would we be able to consider that this security blanket of, thinking that if I need medicine, I can ask for it and it will come to me, as if that's really going to provide a permanent security from having to suffer eventually from physical pain, from loss of the functionality, and from death. But there's a way in which even somebody who practices a lot of contentment in connection to food, or in connection to lodgings, or in connection to clothing, it would be possible that on the event of illness, they would lose their contentment and fall into emotionally becoming distraught and upset because the body is ill and something is needed to take care of it. So then this is like the challenge for us. Can we really extend and expand the domain of contentment, both to realize that the lodging, the clothing, the medicine, and the food, that none of it eventually is going to do the job. It may only temporarily delay a certain amount of discomfort. It may temporarily make us have a impression of safety, but actually we're not really safe at that level. And that comfort is just a very frail, weak, changeable thing, and not something that can be relied on. So then it's a very deep ethical practice to develop the attitude of, I could say, contentment, humility, gratitude, and compassion in relationship to food and in relationship to all of the basic requisites of life that are part of supporting the continued existence of this body. I can stop here and accept your comments. And in this case, I'm particularly interested in knowing how you are able to be contented and free in relationship to these necessities of the life. Sharanya.
So I have found that I have been most content when I have had a strong meditation practice, because I think the meditation is a tool that is used to kind of access other levels of contentment. But I have not been able to keep up with the practice. And so I think something else that helps me is trying to actively practice gratitude.
Uh-huh.
So I noticed, like in the West, especially through social media, everything is just so distorted, right? Like on Instagram, there are all of these postings about how pets should be treated. And sometimes I get caught up in that. But in other times, I think about where I came from and how there were so many poor people living on dirt floors. And so when I actually think about how I've never had to go hungry a single day of my life, when so many others have, even from the country I was born and raised in, I think it really helps me try to be content with what I have rather than getting caught up in wanting more.
Yes. Thank you. Patipada.
Thank you, Aya. I am on the other end of that spectrum. I grew up in poverty, and there were times when the only thing we had to eat was rice, and we would get a little milk from the neighbor because they had a cow. And so coming from those beginnings and having this great good fortune to live in a country of plenty and to be able to have the opportunity to have an education and live a life where I have shelter and clothes and food, and I know I always will. I have healthcare. From where I started in my life to now, it's a very easy thing to be contented, because having experienced both, I know that even if I lose everything and have absolutely nothing, I can survive. So the actual experience of it is a great comfort.
That's a wonderful observation. And so you've taken the early life experiences, which were perhaps, well, challenging, certainly, and transformed that into something which is a real anchor of wisdom in the circumstance where you are now.
I think I'm very fortunate to have lived my life as it has unfolded. I think very, very fortunate.
Mm-hmm. Damon?
Well, my comment is in line with the previous comments. I definitely am very tempted to go to Whole Foods Market, and that seems to be the pinnacle of eating snobbery. But on the other hand, my family of 3 lives in approximately 1,000 square feet of space in a small home, and it gets crowded sometimes, but for the most part, I feel content. And compared to the other houses in the neighborhood that are, 1,500, 2,000, 3,000 square feet, I think it's a pretty modest existence. So thank you for saying that food here is a stand-in for lodging and clothing. Thank you.
Okay. It's not whether we live in a large house or a small house, or whether we eat what would be considered to be a perfectly pure, fashionable, organic food, or whether we eat inexpensive food that necessarily makes the difference. It's like they say there's nothing we can experience which is not a suitable object for mindfulness, for mindful awareness. So if we're having a really great, high spiritual, wonderful experience, we can be mindful of that. If we're experiencing something horrible, we can be mindful of that. And if we are managing to have some kind of a very balanced life in terms of using the requisites of life in an ethical and responsible way, we can be mindful of that. Or whether there's whatever kind of food we take. If we're taken to a banquet and served a 10-course dinner at a banquet, we can be mindful of that. So all of them can be handled with that mindfulness, seeing the danger, developing that disenchantment towards the whole experience, developing dispassion and freedom. And then from that standpoint of freedom, having compassion and care and mindfulness and wisdom connected to food. Corina.
Hi, everyone. Yes, thank you. Something that's helping me stay content lately, I feel I've been fortunate enough to improve or increase in material since I've been living. And what helps me stay content is actually to realize the drawback of having more or having too much, because it's not as simple as it sounds. As like it's not just pleasure. Just a very simple example. Someone offered us some old bedroom furniture from their mom, and it all matched. And I'm like, oh wow, we can like replace our bedroom furniture. It's like, and so we did, but it just, I realized what a great system I had before. I knew where everything was, and it just the right drawers. It had evolved over time. Like every drawer had just the right amount of stuff in it. And now I like can't find things, and I don't know where to put things. And it looks great, but it's not very as functional as it used to be. And maybe a better example is my neighborhood puts a lot of free clothes out on the street, and I've picked up all kinds of interesting items, and my closet has like grown and grown. And it's hard to, it's hard to keep up with it. It's like, I don't know what to wear and more to mend, and it's not quite right. And so for me, I'm realizing I've sort of just like made like a, I don't know, like a determination to be like, next time something seems like a good idea, even if it's free, I'm just going to really, I really kind of don't want to add any more than I already have. And to kind of just look at nutriment as just enough to get the job done, enough to get the job of living done, or, not being hungry and being able to do what I need to do and walk around the town done, as opposed to extra nice furniture, extra nice clothes or something. So that's something that's helping.
Thank you. So actually that this value of the contemplation of food may lead to a real shift in our actual behavior. And the shift in behavior could get us out of certain kind of loops where our consumption is not adding to our happiness, but rather the opposite. So yeah, that's very good. True. I'll take Rawanti.
Thank you, Aya. For me, one of the places that I do a reflection is when I do the dishes, cleaning the pots and pans. So I look at how when the food is mixed with water, how it dissolves and becomes so become unattractive. So then I reflect, this is what happens to the good food I eat in my stomach when it mixes with the stomach fluid. So this has helped me to develop an attitude of disenchantment, or reduce my craving towards food.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yes, that's a good method. So one can do intentional contemplations to cut the enchantment or the illusions about food as the cause of happiness. One can direct the mind towards certain kind of reflections, certain kinds of observations to bring about that disenchantment. I'll call on Susie. Okay, Susie, and then Sheila, and then Maureen. Susie, you're muted.
The issue on the food and the need for nutrients is really quite the most challenging one, because by definition, we kind of made to be so dependent on food. If nothing else at all, we are dependent on it. So I'm wondering about this whole idea of thinking of using the basic non-self, that we're nothing but the 5 khandhas, right? So I'm trying to use that principle to help out. It's okay about the understanding of the rupa, the vedana, sanya, sankhara, and vijnana. But when it comes to food, it's I begin to think that there's a loophole in here, that we are so dependent on the food, and it's very hard for us to use this, to apply this perspective of non-self or us as being a khanda, because at some point in time we're going to have to be attached to the food, because we must eat in order to sustain our life force. So I sometimes wondering why we are made this way, why are we created in this way. In one way, we are told to contemplate the 5 khanda, yet when it comes to hunger and the attachment to live on, we have to have food, so that's a very perplexing and a very difficult point, to practice.
Susie, you bring up something very deep. The Buddha, or I should say the Bodhisattva, as a young man, noticed suffering. And he was so ethical and so determined to not just ignore the question, but to look more and more deeply into it, to say, where does suffering comes from? And he found it's sort of like the basic process of life, right? It's birth and death, and everything leading up to birth and death, and the round of rebirth, which is the essence, or the in a way the culmination of the most serious kind of suffering. I mean, if I break my ankle, or if I sprain my wrist or something like that, that's suffering, but that's nothing compared with the suffering of the round of rebirth. And so it actually is the nature of living beings to have the desire to live, to stay alive, and to make our life last a little bit longer. And even to try to make our life last as long as possible, or even to try to make our life last eternal. And this drive is a basic part of not just human nature, but the nature of sentient beings, from the insects and the worms. All of them want to live. And so then it was
that's an ultimate. That's really, I guess, the DNA made us this way, but yet that there's the principle of Dhamma on top of it too, that eventually we're going to have to apply it, eventually.
So the miracle was so unusual among all the animals in the world, all the sentient beings in the world, that one human discovered the possibility to cut craving and to become liberated from dukkha by cutting off this craving for existence. And it's like that discovery of the end of dukkha and the way to the end of dukkha is the thing that's unusual in the whole world. The perpetuation of dukkha is maybe the thing that's easy to find everywhere.
And also in all sentient beings, at the end. I mean, when it comes to this point, we're all the same.
Right.
No matter what level.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm going to call on. I'm going to call on Sheila and then Maureen. Sheila?
Thank you, Aya. In the context of food, I wanted to share a success thanks to participating in the study the morning meditation and Sunday afternoon study, sutta study during the last winter Vasa with Dhamma Dharini that Aya Brahmawara led, she encouraged us or let us, floated the idea of thinking about the 8 precepts on Vajrayana. And I started out doing that maybe back in February. And I found that the 6th precept, not eating afternoon, and for me, it's maybe 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, but I noticed that that just seemed like something that was so natural. So I don't know that if it's something that maybe my body wanted or whatever, but definitely on Upasata days, all 4 within the month. And that has gravitated over to the other days. It's not unusual for me to have my last meal at 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon on a non-Upasata day. And I just have resonated with that. And there are times when I will intentionally not eat, and I'm trying to not eat in the car when I'm driving. And I found that the 6th precept, just as a model and as a container, has helped in that way. Thank you.
Thank you. So this practice, this lifestyle, the Buddha praises knowing the measure of food, which is knowing how to set a limit on the occasions for eating or the times for eating. And then when filling the plate with the food, knowing how much to take and maybe taking a little bit less than the amount that your appetite thinks you want. Sometimes they say the eyes are bigger than the stomach, and there's a temptation to take more than you need, but just taking a little bit less than you think you need, and then you discover that you didn't really need that much food after all. So these kinds of practices are very skillful practice to break the instinctive craving and attachment in relation to food. Now, I know Maureen has been waiting patiently.
Thank you. I grew up in post-war Britain to some extent, but my parents were, very much from that era, and there was rationing, and it was criminal when I was growing up to leave anything on your plate. You didn't waste food. It was so precious. And I'm still like that. And it's stood me in good stead when we didn't have much money when we were first married, and I had to really use my brains to come up with meals and not waste anything. So, and that, it's almost obsessive. So I've got to get that in proportion. But the other thing is, I have a garden, and I don't believe monastics in the Theravada tradition are supposed to do any gardening. And it takes me, by the time I go out and I garden and I grow things, and then when I've harvested it, I've got to then do something with it. And it seems to swallow up so much of my time. I'm really beginning to think, well, maybe I should cut back on the gardening and just use my time, because the most precious thing at my age now is time. And so these obsessions have got to somehow get in proportion to what's appropriate for me at my stage. But the thing that I find most comforting are the 5 considerations that monastics make every day. I'm of the nature to decay. Well, that's quite clear. I'm in my own body. I'm for the nature to be diseased. Okay, I'm in pretty good health, and I'm for the nature to die, and I'm comfortable with those. And then the next thing is all that is mine, dear and delightful, will change and vanish. And I can recognize that that's true, and I can accept that as well. And then there's the third one that's about your owner of your own karma and that kind of thing. And those things, that when I sort of think about those things, then I can be calm about a lot of stuff. But I really have got to get my time management sorted out. I mend clothes. I mean, I don't need to I could just chuck them away or what, but that seems wrong as well. They kind of move through to being your scruffy clothes that you do housework in, and they finally are a rag that you can clean up messes with. It's just that's how I was brought up, though, I think.
Mhm.
I've just got to get used to it, got to work things out now that I'm at this stage of my life. So, but this is a very interesting topic. It really is. And I'm enjoying it.
What you're speaking of, which are the habits of a lifetime in terms of frugality, is actually exactly on point. That even though we may find that we change our priorities as a result of reflection, we may modify our behavior when we shifted our values. Nevertheless, we've got to go on and on and on with, in one way or another, preparing food and eating food and doing the other necessary things involved with having a life. Yes, and that it does include mending the clothing when the clothing wears out. And just the other day, one of my colleagues here was looking for a jacket or a blouse to wear, and we didn't have one in the right size. And and I was kind of like, well, we're monastics. If you need a jacket, just here's some cloth, just make yourself a jacket. So yes, we also do these things. And the point is, while we still have some life left, we still have some time left in this lifetime, we can't stop eating, but we've got to make our mind liberated in relationship to that. And it might be, by the by, that our values will change in terms of how many different pieces of clothing we have, or how much time we spend in the garden, or how much time we spend in the kitchen. But even so, we can't give it up completely. And we should, not pretend that like a purity comes from not getting involved in making food. Rather, purity comes from the mind, comes from mindfulness and wisdom. So, yeah. Richard.
Thank you. I don't know if you're planning to go in more detail on that example you gave about the people crossing the desert, having to eat their son's flesh. Of course, it's just a metaphor, but simile, however you want to look at it. But that particular one, well, Buddha is the caravan leader who leads us safely across the desert. And the idea is that it's related to the lust for the five senses, because eating food specifically kind of includes all the five senses to a certain extent, right? There's the taste, there's the smell, there's the touch, there's the sight, And there's even hearing in the sense that maybe you hear the way it's being cooked, like something's being fried or something, you're hearing the crackling or popcorn or something, you know, and you think, oh boy, that's going to be tasty. Or if someone says, oh, this is very tasty, here, try this, right? So all the five senses are engaged in that. And what the Buddha says is the reason that you feel these, you might say, negative emotions about taking nutriment is that this comes up in another sutta where I think there's somebody talking to the Buddha about, you know, how come the monks eat meat or something? And so the Buddha gives the example that if a monk has attained, you know, full metta consciousness, so that he's continuously sending out, you know, metta, you know, infinitely to the whole universe and all the beings of the universe, right? You know, you think he has some kind of nefarious or negative type of thought about things, but all beings of the universe include, even if you're a vegetarian, they include vegetables. So you have to kill all of these things to eat, right? But all these things have just as much worth as you do. You know what I mean? You're putting yourself kind of like paramount above them. So the idea is that, okay, you'll take nutrition to keep the body going so you can keep your spiritual endeavor going to try to achieve enlightenment, right? But you're not relishing that fact that you have to do that. And Buddha says that these five senses, the lust for these five senses can be understood by this type of meditation. And that if you fully understand it, you know, you'll have no desire to come back to this world where here in particularly, you know, the heavens are not so bad, but here in particularly, it's dog eat dog, you know. It's like everyone's surviving on the life of all the other creatures, you know. So anyways, I just thought I would point that out.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You have pointed to, in part, to what we'll be talking about tomorrow in terms of contact, which gets involved with the sense contact, and also what you mentioned is relevant to intention. So a person's intention when they take food is very significant. Well, first of all, you can't avoid having intentions, but you can hold the intentions in a way which is going to perpetuate your suffering, or in a way which is going towards freedom. So, yes. Well, this has been a lively conversation, and I appreciate having it. I think your participation makes it more authentic and perhaps useful. Now I'd like to lead us in some meditation related to food, and continuing with the theme of the Satipatthana Sutta, I'm going to basically, and we can go into meditation, and I'm going to read you the charnel ground meditation. So welcome to, now come to an upright and balanced posture for meditation. Aware of this physical body in an upright and balanced posture. Letting the body be relaxed and arranging the body in a way which is stable, so one can be still. Aware of this living body with the pulsing of all of the living organs, the heart, the breathing, the flow of the blood and the flow of the other fluids in the body. The energetic quality of this living body. And imagine going to a charnel ground where the dead bodies are. Seeing a corpse thrown aside in the charnel ground. 1, 2, or 3 days dead, bloated, livid, oozing matter. Comparing this living body with the corpse. This body too is of the same nature. It will be like that. It is not exempt from that fate. This is how one meditates, contemplates the body in the body. Contemplating the body internally, contemplating the body externally, contemplating both internally and externally. Contemplating the body in its nature of arising. Contemplating the body in its nature of vanishing. Contemplating the body in the body, its nature of both arising and vanishing. Or else, mindfulness that there is a body is simply established in him to the extent necessary for bare knowledge and mindfulness. So one dwells independent, not clinging to anything in the world. This is how one contemplates the body in the body. Again, as though he sees a corpse thrown aside in a charnel ground, being devoured by crows, hawks, vultures, dogs, jackals, or various kinds of worms. A bhikkhu compares this body with it. Thus, this body too is of the same nature. It will be like that. It is not exempt from that fate. As though one would see a corpse thrown aside in a charnel ground, a skeleton with flesh and blood held together with sinews. A bhikkhu compares this body with it. Thus, this body too is of the same nature. It will be like that. It is not exempt from that fate. Again, as though he were to see a corpse thrown aside in a charnel ground, a fleshless skeleton smeared with blood, held together with sinews. A bhikkhu compares this very body with it thus. This body too is of the same nature. It will be like that. It is not exempt from that fate. Again, as though he were to see a corpse thrown aside in a charnel ground, a skeleton without flesh and blood, held together with sinews. A bhikkhu compares this very body with it thus. This body too is of the same nature. It will be like that. It is not exempt from that fate. Again, as though he were to see a corpse thrown aside in a charnel ground. Disconnected bones scattered in all directions. Here a hand bone, there a foot bone, here a shin bone, there a thigh bone, here a hip bone, there a backbone, here a rib bone, there a breastbone, here an arm bone, there a shoulder bone, here a neck bone, there a jaw bone, here a tooth, there a skull. One compares this very body with it thus. This body too is of the same nature. It will be like that. It is not exempt from that fate. Again, as though he were to see a corpse thrown aside in a charnel ground, bones bleached white, the color of shells. One compares this very body with it thus. This body too is of the same nature. It will be like that. It is not exempt from that fate. Again, as though he were to see a corpse thrown aside in a charnel ground, bones heaped up, more than a year old. A bhikkhu compares this very body with it thus. This body too is of the same nature. It will be like that. It is not exempt from that fate. Again, as though he were to see a corpse thrown aside in a charnel ground, bones more than a year old, that have rotted and crumbled to dust. A bhikkhu compares his very body with it thus. This body too is of the same nature. It will be like that. It is not exempt from that fate. In this way, one dwells contemplating the body in the body internally, or one dwells contemplating the body in the body externally. Or one dwells contemplating the body in the body, both internally and externally. Or else one dwells contemplating the body in its nature of arising. Or one dwells contemplating the body in the body, its nature of vanishing. Or one dwells contemplating in the body, its nature of both arising and vanishing. Or else mindfulness that there is a body is simply established in one to the extent necessary for bare knowledge and mindfulness. And one dwells independent, not clinging to anything in the world. That too is how one dwells contemplating the body in the body. Araham Samma Sambuddha Bhagava Buddhang Bhagavantang Abhivademi. Svakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammam Namasami. Supatipanno Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Sangham Namami. Please continue your meditation. At 5 o'clock in the morning, you may join us for silent meditation followed by morning chanting. And at 6 o'clock in the morning, there will be the next Dhamma talk.
Thank you, Aya.
Aya, are we following the schedule that you laid out on the website?
Yes, we're following the schedule on the website.
Okay, so I'm just trying my time at Eastern time. Then you're going to do. I can join silent meditation that you're going to start at 5 a.m.
Yes.
Great. Okay, I look forward to it. Thank you.
Aya, did you get my letter?